period of time, has seen this beautiful cottage in Gothic architecture. It was purchased by Marilyn Strickler's parents, Margaret and Harold Rosser, in 1963. Marilyn told me her parents did not name the cottage, but once it became hers, she and Jack moved into the cottage after her parents had died. She named it Sunny Gothic and painted it the bright yellow. I had not seen the name before, so when I saw her yesterday at the dedication of the pool, I asked her, I said, do you actually have a name on your cottage? And she said, yes, it's on the side. So this morning I went around and found it. So some of these signs you have to look a little bit for. Someone this week asked me what criteria you used for taking photos of signs. First criteria is it had to have a sign on the outside of the house that I could see. And that eliminated a whole lot of cottages, and then I just tried to get a variety. But some are a little challenging, and so Sunny Gothic I had to look for on the side of the house. Another interesting architectural feature at Lakeside are these cottages that are referred to as Steamboat Gothic. Comes from the appearance that these cottages look like the bow of early double-decker passenger steamboats that were on the large lakes in this country. This has been the Bud Dallas showboat in that family since 1975, but they reference its the year it was built in 1879. But if you look at it closely, you can almost imagine passengers sitting on big, comfortable chairs along those decks as it steams through Lake Erie. And Lakeside does have a castle. This stone castle was built by the Wannell family. I should have put the year on, and I don't know it. But it was built over many, many years. The stone was all hand-cut from the quarry by Mr. Wannell and his sons. And they started in the basement, and the family lived in the basement for many, many years until they gradually got the first floor done and then the second floor. It was purchased in 2014 by the Krukenmeyer family, and they have 3 little girls, early school age, preschool age, and I could just imagine them talking to their friends about they now have a castle that they live in the summertime. Unfortunately, they've named it the castle, but there is no sign on this cottage. We have a few references to astronomy in cottage names. Pleiades was purchased by Mark Buckey in 2006. It was a very worn-looking cottage at the time. It had been built in 1881 and was one of those cottages where little work had been done, at least in the last 50 years of its existence. And so the Buckeys raised all but the porch and then rebuilt the house in a similar style based on the original footprint. Mark told me he wanted it to represent the original to the extent it could, so they did retain the style, the yellow color that the cottage was for many, many years, and the name, which refers to a star cluster in the constellation Taurus. This is actually the second Pleiades, historically, that I know of. There could have been more. We don't have good documentation of cottage names from the early years, but W.D. Ross named one of his cottages Pleiades, and it was the one that was built as a triplex, a main floor and 2 apartments above. It's now owned by Randy Buckland on Plum, but one of the upper units he named Pleiades. Talk about a wonderful opportunity to use your creativity when you build 20 cottages and you get to name all of them. You can be very creative. And he certainly was in the names he selected. Another one that refers to astronomy is Starry Nights, spelled S-T-A-R-I. This cottage was originally built circa 1901, and it was one of only 2 cottages in the first block of Lynn for many years. It was a boarding house operated by Miss Mason, and she called it Buena Vista, which is Spanish for beautiful view, because there were no other cottages there obstructing her view from Lynn down to the lake. It was purchased in 1965 by Peter Starry, and that family has retained ownership through his 2 daughters, and they've used Starry Nights as the name for their cottage. Now this one is not one you can see from the outside. I was fortunate to be hanging out on North Lynn, and I saw that there were family members on the porch. So I went over and asked them specifically if they had a sign for Starry Nights. They told me they did, but it was hung on the porch. So they invited me in, and it's hung perpendicular to the front of the porch, you know, up on a rafter. So this is one where, unless you can get inside, you would never have an opportunity to take a photo. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about names that I see as philosophy related, and time is one of those. There are 12 cottage names with the word time in it. Did anybody guess that as one of the? One person did. That is terrific. You're really paying attention when you walk around Lakeside to have picked that up. I did not know that until I started on this project. This is a wonderful relationship of a sign to a clock on the Switzer Cottage on Elm. They purchased it in 2013 on lake time. The clock is running, it's accurate. It was in fact 11:15 when I took that photo, and all I could think of when I took it was, if I were a teenager and had promised I would be home by a certain time, or an elementary school ager who, with the new pool up there, had promised to be home at a certain time, there is no way I could fool Mom and Dad walking up the steps that I got there at a different time. It's about time. They purchased it in 2014. I did not speak with them. My guess would be that it's a couple that waited a long time to buy a lakeside cottage. And so one or the other of them is saying it is about time that we have our own lakeside cottage. Meant to Be has an interesting story. Virginia and Al Metz had vacationed in Lakeside for many years, but they never expected to be able to afford a cottage, particularly after they had a significant, Virginia reported a 50% loss on the sale of their home in Detroit, Michigan, when they were ready to retire. Their plan was to move and establish their permanent home in Arizona, and they did in fact buy a retirement home in Arizona, but still in the back of their minds was this idea that they liked to summer in Lakeside. Several factors came together in 2007 and 8 that allowed them to purchase the cottage at Cedar that had been owned by Reverend Harry Hall, and they were able to proceed with that, and their luck continued by finding a contractor who was able to create a stairway up to an attic and create a sleeping loft up there. So their daughter-in-law said to them it was just meant to be that this cottage would be yours. Becky and Brett Johnson's cottage, called Century's End, at what was the end of Jasmine at the time. They purchased a double lot in 1996. They found plans from a house that was built 100 years ago at the end of the 19th century, and used that with their architect's assistance to design the cottage that they completed in 1998, 100 years after the house plans were created, just as they had hoped prior to Century's End. Now a little sociology. Kinship groups are individuals who are linked by blood or marriage, and there are in fact 3 Ferris wheel signs that I took photos of yesterday. The first Ferris wheel sign was at 401 or 408 Lakefront. How many of you remember walking by and seeing the Ferris wheel sign out in front of that cottage? Yes. Norma Ferris purchased the cottage in 1939. It is amazing to me the number of cottages from the very beginning where the purchaser is listed by the woman's name, even when they were married. It is probably, I would guess, at least 30 to 40% of cottages are listed in the wife's name very early on in the Lakeside records of property transfers. Norma purchased this. Her children were quite small at the time. They grew up summers on the lakefront. And it was a very bustling household. Early on, Norma was entertaining shufflers, promoting shufflers at Lakeside, both from outside the community to come in, as well as promoting children learning to play shuffleboard. She had her own 2 children and later 6 grandchildren. So I can imagine it was a whirlwind of activity inside that cottage, and she named it the Ferris wheel. So this is the original lakefront cottage sign that is now owned by Norma's grandson, Tom, or in his possession. I don't know that he would say he owns it, but he's the keeper of the family house sign. Then Larry and Marilyn Ferris purchased their Jasmine Cottage in 1984. They retained the name, the Ferris wheel, of the original family cottage, and got a new sign for their new place on Jasmine. And finally, Tom Ferris with his wife Mary became the 3rd generation of Ferris owners in Lakeside, purchasing this cottage at 249 Poplar in 2011. And Mary had a friend, I believe in Cincinnati, who designed and painted this sign for them, which is just a beautiful, beautiful sign. The jewels make it sparkle in the sun. So 3 cottages known as the Ferris wheel, 3 very different but clearly related signs reflecting this family's name and love of Lakeside. What's interesting to me is Tom and Mary specifically chose to put Ferris wheel 2, T-O-O, when they could have written it as a numeric 2 or Roman numeral 2. So it's interesting to how people make those decisions. The Bancroft Cottage on Sycamore represents certainly a kinship group of multiple generations. It was named in 1942 and purchased by Mr. E. Dow Bancroft, who is the grandfather of the current owner, Fran Warner, who's here in the front. Fran has very fond memories of spending time with her grandfather at this cottage. Fran's granddaughter, Hannah, is now staying with Fran this summer. She's working at the hotel in the Fountain Inn desk, and so Hannah is now enjoying the cottage that her great-great-grandfather built. Stop a while is the Flooding's cottage, 2 generations there. It was named by Frank Flooding's parents, Ruth and Dana Flooding. This is the original sign, Frank tells me, and it always has had these yellow shutters and bright red yellow cushioned chairs that beckon weary travelers. And Frank told me an interesting story. One summer his mother came out, and sitting on the front porch was a woman she'd never met before. And the woman said to her, "Well, I hope you mean it with what your sign said." I was walking down the street and I just am so tired and hot that I came up on the porch to sit down. Well, the stranger introduced herself to Ruth as Anita Gribble, and the two of them became great friends over the years. So, you know, Cottage